All right, so today instead of making a video about a particular song, I'm going to make a video just talking generally about how to think about playing songs on the piano. And I want to start by saying I think music education has really failed, especially piano players, or really all instruments other than maybe guitar and possibly bass, depending on your teacher, in that it is overly focused on reading music and underly focused on understanding music and knowing how to play music and like how it is actually structured. So the analogy I would use is that most music education is similar to reading out loud. So you're looking at a block of text, like you're reading out a book. You're reading it word for word. Like, yep, you can read, you can communicate a book to somebody, but that's a whole completely different thing to being able to speak a language or to actually have a conversation. So like to be able to read something out loud, you don't need to actually understand what's going on. You have no input into what's going on. You're just like a computer essentially. You're reading out exactly what's written. And that is how most music education teaches people to think about music. And I'm going to try in this video to give you some of the basic structure to help you actually understand what's going on and to be more of an active participant in the music. And so the aim of this is to allow you to play in a band or to listen to a song that you hear and that you like and to figure out how to play it, or to write your own songs or to improvise, or all of this stuff that seems so impossible to people who have been taught in a very music reading focused kind of methodology. That stuff seems so difficult, so impossible, but it's actually not. It's actually a much simpler proposition than you think it is. So, okay, where do we get started? So I assume you have a little bit of basic knowledge, so you know at least the notes. So generally, piano players think about starting with C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back up to C, and then that repeats each octave. That's your white notes, and then you've got your black notes, which are sharps and flats. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, etc. I'm racing through this because I assume you kind of already know this. And then you've got your flats. So going from E down to E flat, that's the same as D sharp. Okay, so the first thing to talk about for understanding how music works is the concept of a key. So it's quite a difficult concept to describe. It's essentially a collection of notes and chords which go together and sound good or sound a particular way. And I like to think of it as like a home base. And so the only real way to understand this is by hearing it. So if I'm playing in what I call the key of C, then my home base is a C. And so let's just say, to pick an example, I'm playing the song Happy Birthday in the key of C. Okay, so that's the key of C, and I'll explain a little bit more about what notes and chords are common in the key of C in a second. But I could play that same song in a different key. So let's say I was going to play it in the key of G. Now you can hear the similarities there, okay? It's clearly the same song, and we'll talk a bit more about what actually constitutes a song in a second, but it's in a different key, it has a different home base. Now, if you're reading music, you would never be able to transpose like that quickly, or very few people can do that. Maybe a few, professional accompanists or this kind of thing. But it should be trivial. You're moving a very basic song from one key to another. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I'm talking about understanding the structure of music. And you should be able to play Happy Birthday in any key. So let's say in the key of E flat. Any key, pick a key, we can play it in that key. Okay, so what are the building blocks of a key? So let's start with the key of C. There's a few different ways to think about this, and kind of expert opinions differ, but I think maybe the easiest way to think about it is to start with a scale. So in the key of C, or C major, the notes that are kind of part of that key are all the white notes. So that's a C major scale, if you're familiar with that. You may have learned that as part of kind of traditional piano education. So that's also, if you're familiar with like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, those are those notes. And then obviously it repeats after that in the next octave. Now, the way that this is determined is by the gaps between the notes. So if you're starting in C, so if we're playing the key of C, the next note in the scale is one tone up. So you skip a semitone, you go up a tone, then another tone, then a semitone, then a tone, 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 semitone. Now you can determine the notes in any key by following that same series of tones and semitones. So let's say we're going to play in the key of A. We're going to go tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So that means that those are the notes in the key of A major. And so on for any starting note, you can come up with those notes. We're going to stick in the key of C for a bit because it's easy to think about. Okay, so those are like our building block notes. Now, what we actually do with those notes, it's important to mention, like, it doesn't mean that those are the only notes you can ever play when you're in the key of C. It just means those are your kind of main building blocks. And that might sound a bit vague or a bit kind of wishy-washy, but it's more a concept that you understand through playing songs and just being able to hear it. So what are we going to do with those building blocks? Well, the first thing that we do is build chords. So I want you to think of a song in general as being 3, possibly 4 parts. There's going to be a bass line. Okay, now that is often played by your left hand, but it could also be played by a bass guitar or any instrument really, but normally a low instrument. And that normally kind of outlines the main chord changes of a song. So if we're playing again Happy Birthday, at the start, the bass line will probably be playing the note C if we're playing in the key of C. And I'll explain why in a second. The next kind of building block of a song is the chords or the middle accompaniment part. And that is where a piano or a guitar are very good, or kind of multiple single line instruments. And that will be somewhere in the middle range normally. And again, I'll explain how you know what to play in that middle range in a second. And then the third part of the song is the melody. And that is, you can play that kind of high up on the piano, or often you can kind of mix together like a bass line and the chords in the left hand and then a bit of the melody in the right hand, or you find some way to make the 3 parts work. It could also be sung or played by another instrument. And that melody will typically use just the notes that are in your key, maybe with a few extra notes. So for Happy Birthday, the melody would be. Okay, what I'm going to talk about now is the chord part, so the middle part. So the chords are like the overall structure of your song. So the way that we build the chords in a particular key is by using that scale that we just talked about and picking every second note. So if we start on C, skip a note, skip a note, that gives us our C major chord. And I'm going to call that chord number 1 because it's built on the first note in the scale. So that's chord 1, C major. And the reason we call it major is because the gap from the first note to this middle note is 2 tones. And then from the middle note to the top note is a tone and a semitone. And just that combination of distances makes what we call a major sound. And it's typically, in a very basic sense, known as a happy sound. Now, if I lowered this one, that would be C minor. That's typically, you think of that as a sad sound. But our chord 1, C major, is our like most basic chord in the key of C. And it sounds like a home bass. Like when we're finished a song, Feel how it wants to go back home to C, and it feels finished. It feels like most songs start and end on that chord. Not all, but a lot of them. So that's our home bass. And you might be able to see what I'm doing here. In my left hand, I'm playing the bass line. So typically the bass line will hit the root note of each chord. So like if I'm playing a C major chord, the bass line will be playing a C. And that could, as I said, that could be on a bass guitar or a double bass or whatever, a low instrument, you'd be playing a C. Now, you don't have to always just strictly play a C. Like a common pattern is to play some other notes of the chord. So maybe, like if I was just sitting on a C chord for a long time, the bass line might go. So I'm using the C and the G. Whatever, there's some silly little bass lines, but it can also use other notes just in the scale. Like a jazzy way of playing is what's called a walking bass line, where that bass is playing crotchets and kind of moving all around that scale. So I would play like. Anyway, doesn't matter too much the details of it. Just know that typically you want to start with, you want to just play that root note, that bottom note of the chord in the bass line. Now, the thing to know about chords for the middle part is that is the most basic form of the chord, or its first inversion, which starts on the C. But really a chord is just a combination of those notes. So you can put those notes anywhere on the piano, and that creates different voicings. So you could put a C, as long as you've got a C, an E, and a G, that is a C major chord. So you could put a C, a G, and an E, like that. You could put a G, C, E, C, G. So this is the kind of thing that you have to choose when you're playing the piano. So you can play like this if you want. Play like this. Play like this. They all have different sounds. Maybe the melody has an E, so you want to put that on the top, because it cuts through a bit more, or maybe you want to spread it out. Maybe you want to put it really high. This is all up to you. All of this stuff is just a choice of the piano player within that basic structure of a C chord. We then build our other basic chords within a key by just moving the root note up. And the other notes all step up one note in the scale as well. So if you've got a C, E, G, you're going to step up one to get a D, F, A. Now you can hear that has that kind of sad or minor quality. Now, again, it's just using all the notes in the scale, but it just happens that if you start on D, or the second note, so you get your chord 2, it's a minor chord. So that's D minor. So you've got C, so C major, that's chord 1. D minor is chord 2. Step up again, you get an E minor, which is chord 3. F major, chord 4. G major is chord 5. A minor is chord 6. And you get a chord called B diminished, which is a bit of a complicated one. The reason it's different is that, if you can see here, the gap between the root note of the chord and this note, the 5th, is slightly different to all the other chords. So all of these ones are 1, 2, 3 tones and a semitone apart. Whereas this one is only 3 tones. It's called a tritone. And so that's quite a tense, unusual chord. And so you don't hear this chord very much. It is used sometimes, but it's by far the least commonly used chord within the key of C major. And then you're back to C major. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the characteristics of these chords. So as I said, chord 1 is like your home base. That's where most songs start and end, and that's kind of the most basic, safe home chord within a key. I'd say the next most important chord is chord 5, because chord 5 leads very strongly back to chord 1. Like the end. So if you're familiar with classical music, again, that would be a perfect cadence. And you can see Happy Birthday ends with that. So chord 1 to chord 5, back to chord 1, right? So just to slow that down a little bit. So remember again, there's three parts to a song. There's the bass line. So the bass line for Happy Birthday is like boom, 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 boom. So chord 1, 5, 5, back to 1. And the melody is. Okay, and you can think of that in terms of the scale. So we're starting up on the 5th note of the scale. And so you kind of get a sense for like how melodies fit into keys, so that if I had to play it in a different key, like the key of G, I would know that, okay, it's got to start here. Okay, but we'll stick in the key of C for now. Now the chords, the part in between, are going to be C, boom, boom. So chord C, boom, happy birthday to you. So go from C to G, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear boom, boom. Goes to chord 4, happy birthday, 5, 1. So see how that chord 5 leads really strongly back to chord 1. That's really important. So, okay, chord 1 is the most important, probably followed by 5, then probably 4. So chord 4 can lead back to 1, that's a plagal cadence, or it can lead up to chord 5 if you want, or really it can go anywhere, but it's like just another like very important building block that's in many, many songs. Okay, and those are the three major chords within a key. So your 1, 4, and 5. So a lot of songs just use those chords. It's very possible. Let's just analyze a little bit what I'm doing there. So that's, I was thinking of twist and shout. You know, shake it up, baby, shake it up, baby. So I didn't practice that song. It just came into mind when I played those chords. And again, I've never seen sheet music for that song. There's nothing written out. There's no, like, it's a very, you come to understand that these songs, a lot of songs are extremely basic. Like not everything is like, you know, a Chopin waltz or whatever. Like it's basic stuff that you know a few building blocks and you can put together, and then it's just about your individual interpretation or individual little tricks and flair that you know. So this song, that like Twist and Shout, it's the structure of it, it's just chord 1, 4, 5. And you can just hear that. Once you listen to enough music and you look at chords enough and you kind of play enough, you can just hear that song, and even without ever having tried to play it before, you just know that, okay, that's just chord 1, 4, and 5. So, and you can play it in any key again. So just say we're in the key of G, it's still going to be 1, 4, 5. So 1, 4, 5. You can see, I think of it as a bass line. Bass line with my left hand. And again, it's free. I can play whatever I want. So I have little tricks that I know to get from one chord to another. So I know I'm trying to get from chord 1 to 4, so I can put in some little notes that are just going to sound good. And you can see they're all from within the scale of the key of C. Just from experience, just from playing, messing around, you learn tricks to get from one place to another. And in the right hand, the chords are going to be 1, 4, 5. And I can play them in any inversion. So any, you know, instead of doing C, E, G, I can do G, C, E. I can do like... Generally, there's a concept called voice leading, which means you kind of want to have the notes close to each other. So instead of doing, you might want to do. You can see I'm doing little tricks, like with the rhythms. I'm kind of splitting up the notes a bit with my fingers. These are all just little things that you pick up. Like, I don't think many piano players are really thinking very specifically about, okay, I'm going to do. You just kind of do. They're just things that you pick up having played with these chords for a long time. And the good thing is these basic building blocks have been around forever. Like Western music is built upon these building blocks. So if you get really good at going between chords 1, 5, 4, that's a really good start for many, many kinds of music, like whether it's jazz or popular music or rock or anything. You know, these are the building blocks. The last 2 or 3 really building blocks are the minor chords within your key. So that's going to be chord 6 or A minor. So this is a very common one. So A minor. So when you combine chord 1, 6, 4, and 5, that's the classic combination that everybody knows about. Like, you know, there's heaps of songs that just have that. Like, when the night has gone, chord 6, and the land is dark. To chord 4, and the moon is the only. Chord 5, that we'll see. Back to chord 1. You know, it's just those 4 chords. The other 2 are chords 2 and 3. So these are also minor chords, D minor and E minor in the key of C, and they kind of add a bit of color. So they, you know, you hear them in definitely in older songs, like in jazz, a very common pattern is to go from chord 2 to chord 5 back to 1. So like something like Autumn Leaves, if you know that song. So we're in the key of B flat. The falling leaves. Chord 2 is C minor. To chord 5 is F. Drift by my window. B flat major, just chord 1. So it's like. So in the key of C, it would be D minor, G, C. So that's an example of where chord 2 is used. Chord 3 can be really beautiful. It often feels like it's kind of leading up to chord 4. So, you used to say that bubble was an open ball. You can hear it, just a nice, it's got a bit of a melancholy kind of feeling to it. It can also lead to chord 6. Or once you start to play around with these chords, there's so many connections between all of them. So a song is really made of the combination of like a chord progression. So what I've been messing around with a lot is going from 2, 6, 5. I just like the sound of that. Not a particular song that I know of that's like that, but I just really like the way that sounds. And then back to 1 or something like that. Anyway, and then a melody over the top. So if I had my song, what was I doing? 2. So that's a song. So you've seen the process of writing a song there. I've messed around with a few chords. I put a little melody over the top. Maybe you come up with some words. That's a song. So it's not some like insanely complicated procedure where you have to sit down with a notation and write out notes and all this kind of thing. It's just combining some of those very basic few, like small number of building blocks. So that's all I'm going to go into today. There's way more stuff to talk about, like adding extensions to chords, going through some more songs and seeing how the chords work, thinking about like more complicated relationships between chords, like you know, when you can change keys within a song and other things like that, diminished chords, and heaps of other stuff to talk about. But this is just like the basic foundations: keys, scales, chords, and thinking of a song as being like a bass line, chords, and a melody. Yeah, so that's it for today.